Gorkanauts are giant mechs, effigies to the orc god Gork, piloted by knobs that have been exiled from their clans. These mad knobs often take revenge on their clan as soon as they can, and use this Gorkanaut to then become a wandering warrior for the hire of any war boss with the teeth to buy them. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Gorkanaut of the Orks, a giant walker that came out about 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken now. The Gorkanaut comes in at 265 points for a somewhat knight-like stat line. He moves 8 inches, toughness 12 at a 3+ save with a 6+ invulnerable save, 20 wounds, leadership 7, and OC 8. So, he is quite solid on objectives, and he is quite tough. Though high AP weapons will still give him trouble, the 6+ invul does give him the chance to bounce anything though. In terms of ranged weapons, he of course has his Deathstorm Mega Shooter, which is rapid fire 10 at 20 attacks that hit on 5s at 36-inch range with strength 6, AP 1, and damage 1. This is an obscenely powerful anti-horde weapon and also very good against most kinds of infantry, excluding things like Terminators. Rocket launches are Blast, D3 attacks that hit on 5s at 24-inch range with strength 9, AP 2, and damage 3, very good for killing things like Marines and Terminators. The Scorcha is Torrent, it ignores cover at D6 attacks that auto-hit at strength 5, AP 1, and damage 1. And the Twin Big Shooter is Twin-linked Rapid Fire 2, 3 attacks that hit on 5s at 36-inch range with strength 5, AP 0, and damage 1. He comes with the Deathstorm Mega Shooter, of course, 2 rocket launches, 2 Twin Big Shooters, and 1 Scorcha. In terms of melee weapons, he of course has the Claw of Gork, which has Strike and Sweep. At Sweep, it has 15 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 8, AP 1, and damage 2, very good for killing infantry and marines especially. And at Strike, it's 5 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 18, AP 3, and a flat damage 6, so really good for dealing with things like knights, land raiders, and anything in between, and anything lighter will really not want to get hit by this. He has Deadly Demise D6, so make sure that he's not too close to anything when he's about to explode. His main ability is Big and Stompy. Each time this model makes a melee attack while the WA is active, add 1 to the hit roll. Very useful. This guy will be absolutely apocalyptic in the WA already, and when he's hitting on 2s, even more so. He has a transport capacity of 12 Orks infantry. Mega Armor or Jump Pack models take up the space of 2 models, and this model cannot transport Ghazghkull Thraka. So it is important to keep something in that bay, or at least I generally think so. Clanking forward, each time this model makes a normal advance or fall back move, it can move over enemy models, excluding monsters and vehicles, and terrain features that are 4 inches or less in height. This is useful to keep him from being blocked up anywhere, or getting completely screened by chaff. And then, when he is damaged at 1 to 7 wounds remaining, you subtract 4 from his OC and 1 from the hit roll, so he will become drastically less effective once he gets near death. But there are ways to heal him, of course. And in general, he will be quite resilient to a lot of weapons. So long as he doesn't get focused by an entire army, he should be operating at peak efficiency for at least a turn or 2. Overall, though, I quite like this stat line and these weapons for this points cost. It makes him effectively a knight, just a lot cheaper, at the cost of being a little slower and not as tough. Overall, though, it is a very fantastic points for what you get, especially with the recent points drop. In terms of buffing abilities, though, the mech is a very useful one, as he can heal it, gives him +1 to hit all the time at range and outside of the WA, and he's only 45 points. He seems like an absolute slot in, just very easy. And then, in terms of transport capacity, I think either boys or knobs could work very well. Boys are pretty cheap, and offer extra OC and good melee power, but I think their main benefit is honestly just to jump out of the Gorkanaut to act as a screen should something like a horde of Poxwalkers try and get in this thing's way, as you don't want this thing fighting something as worthless as Poxwalkers. You could have them disembark, this guy could light them up with all of his weapons, and then the Orc boys can clean up the rest, then go off to do their own thing, while the Gorkanaut goes on to box the absolute hell out of anything else that it runs into on the battlefield, because its damage is so good. And knobs effectively do the same thing, but they are just more expensive, and this is a very premium transport. While I think knobs are fine inside of a Gorkanaut, I think they would generally prefer something faster, as this is only a couple inches faster than they are. So including something like a truck or battle wagon for them would definitely be preferable. However, I don't think it is necessarily the worst option, more so just not opportune. You could also, of course, instead of boys, use Beast Snaga boys, given how similar the two are. Or you could also use something even cheaper, really, if you just want a screen. I suppose Gretchen could do the job just fine if you want to be as absolute cheap as possible. And the Gretchen, of course, do like to jump onto objectives, so dropping them in the midboard isn't necessarily the worst thing to do, though it's not what I would go with, as I think that it would be better to transport something that can actually fight and help this thing not get bogged down by something like a horde of Poxwalkers, or funnily enough, a horde of Gretchen that gets in their way if you're facing something like a mirror match at Dreadmob who might be running, 120 Gretchen or something like that. However, we are going to move on to detachments now. Of course, in Warhorde, his melee is already amazing. It's even better here, and I'd say he's a great target for Unbridled Carnage, and Kareen can be useful if he explodes. To Big Hunt, they tend to already deal with vehicles pretty well, but I suppose he's fine here. I just wouldn't say he's a standout unit there. Cult of Speed, you could have a boss inside of him with Faster Than Used to jump out after he moves, which could be a very cool looking and very scary melee unit. Dreadmob is probably his best place, unsurprisingly, where he would be just a huge focal unit with the buffs available. He can use all of the stratagems available very easily. Green Tide, he has no direct buffs here, but he can bring some extra anti-vehicle muscle to the army, which is generally very useful. The Meganaut, though in Bully Boys, for example, Knobs and Meganobs already handle vehicles quite well, so I don't think he's quite as useful there, though fulfills the same purpose. However, I'd say in Bully Boys I would generally run a Morkanaut instead of a Gorkanaut, though I suppose it's really up to preference at that point. In terms of further buffs, there's Crusade rules, of course, which I'm going to cover in these videos now. Orks, in terms of custom jobs, he loves Stompomatic Pistons to make him super fast in the WA and just in general be a lot faster. Boss Mech is useful to around to have avoid the ability to get battle scars. In terms of weapon modifications, I'd say just go for extra attacks on the claw, and then pair it with extra AP, and he will be extremely good at taking down most targets. And then if you're running in the Tyrannic War, he is very good as a striding behemoth, obviously. He can get the -2 to out-of-action tests for enemies he destroys, and then he can also get fights first and +1 to advance and charge. Put that on top of Stompomatic Pistons, and he will be absolutely blitzing to the other side of the board. Pariah Nexus, on the other hand, has something like Hardened Defenses, which is super useful, just because he has so many wounds. The Feel No Pain will come in handy. And Tank Hunter can be super useful against the things that he's wounding on 3s and 2s as well, as it gives you reroll 1s to wound. And then Reaper could also be useful to help him not get bogged up with infantry, as that's reroll 1s to hit against infantry and mounted. And Heavily Armored is just in general useful for vehicles, as it lets you negate something like a big railgun or fire prism shot that could really bring some hurt to a big mech like this that wants to stay at full capacity. And of course, if you are running him here, I would always bring that mech, as I mentioned in the Orc section, because Boss Mech is just so valuable, as you don't want a big centerpiece unit like this guy getting whittled down over time and eventually, of course, gaining a bunch of battle scars, which would drastically reduce his efficiency. Overall, though, I do think this is a really fun Crusade unit just because there's so much you can do with it, and buffs can go so far on it. In terms of competitors, the first one that comes to mind is the Morkanaut. The Morkanaut is generally the more balanced of the two. Even though it is technically a shooting unit, it's still orky, so it likes to fight. Its melee is a good bit less powerful, but its range power is a good bit better, unsurprisingly. I would say in general probably less powerful, but it's more flexible, so what do you want? Do you want the melee powerhouse that can shoot up hordes really good, or do you want the Morkanaut that can shoot up all kinds of infantry and vehicles pretty well, but won't mess things up in melee as much? I think they're rather well balanced, though. Ghazghkull Thraka is a little bit pricier once you account for his Mega Knobs, but their melee damage is arguably better than even the Gorkanaut, funnily enough. Though I would say you do need to get delivery for Ghazghkull, preferably a battle wagon. But they offer similar things, but they just in general need different investment. And then I did want to give a legend shout out to the Mega Dread, which is a good bit cheaper, but his melee power is super similar if you give him 2 Dreadrippa Claws. Though the Gorkanaut will edge it out in things like Rhinos, though the Mega Dread wins out points-wise against things like Knights, especially in the WA. He is a good bit more fragile for how expensive he is, but then again, he is also a lot smaller, so hiding behind stuff isn't as hard, and also he isn't Titanic, so I think it's also another model to look out for in Crusade. Moving on, we're just going to wrap this up with the best use, and the Gorkanaut isn't a super complex unit. It's just a big mech that's going to be a centerpiece in your army that's very powerful and will take a lot of fire. His shooting is really no slouch against infantry, as I've already said, and he is really, really excellent in a lot of situations once you give him the right support, though he does need that support, of course. If you want him to really be good at shooting infantry, he will need a mech, and he probably does want some level of auxiliary units to draw a little bit of fire, but given how cheap he is for how tough he is, it's really not too bad. But you definitely don't want him getting blown away. He is pricey enough that you'll want him to do something in a game. I will say, compared to something like the Gorkanaut, he is a lot more solid as a single unit acting on the fringes of the army, as his weapons are just in general have enough volume fire to hit the enemies, and their melee is, of course, strong enough to kill just about anything it gets in contact with. He's a great anvil for your army, and for the points in general, I think he's overall a very, very strong unit. And, I mean, the Gorkanaut's just a cool model in general, so you definitely get bonus points for running that. Very customizable, very cool to see on the table, and, in my opinion, strength-wise, is an absolutely fantastic unit. Anyways, that wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time, where we'll probably cover the Gorkanaut, unsurprisingly enough. Bye-bye.